Okay, well, let's go to Destry John and then Dr. Ellis.
Well, I'm going to put Dr. Ellis on the spot because this board, not quite a year ago, endorsed his nomination to the 400 Years of African American History Commission, and the governor has sent that endorsement to the Secretary of Interior, and he is a member of that commission. And it had its first meeting here, and it's going to meet here again in August. At least I think they are. And that, if we're going to put the word national in front of this moniker, then we need to make it national. And do the things that Dr. Ayers said, absolutely. If we're going to raise the money that the scope that Robin outlined anticipates, we need money not just from the Hampton Roads community. It's going to have to come nationally or internationally. And I think we might ask Dr. Ellis to take a request back to the 400-Year Commission to have them address this question, because when they render their report, that's going to have, it should have, a national impact, bring national recognition to that 400 years of history that's all going to point back here, or a big part of it's going to point back here to Fort Monroe. And if we're going to live up to that significance, we need to make it real. We need to make it national from the start. We need to have the shadow and the light, the hills and the valleys, as your basketball coach talks about. And I think the opportunity is in front of us to seize and to make it real. And I share Mary's concerns about the details, but I think it's a fabulous idea. It's the place to do it, and we just need to make it complete.
We just keep getting such excellent input. John Reynolds.
I hardly know where to start here.
I hardly know where to start, but I'm going to start by saying that Dr. Ellis said he woke up at 3 o'clock. Fortunately, I got an hour more sleep than he did. I woke up at 4 o'clock, worrying, thinking about this. So I hardly know where to start to talk about it. First, I'd like to say, I don't know how I could support anything more seriously and deeply than I support going forward on this. I don't think we need as a board to define what it is. I think we need to let our staff be free to work on it with whoever else amongst us or others to make it work. I think we need to be very open to take a chance that this in fact might be successful. I don't think we should start by thinking about a building. We should start by thinking about programs, about relationships, about concepts, about ideas. And if it grows into the need for a building, then a building. Okay, all that's fairly mundane. The thing I woke up really worried about and came to this in the middle of the night was, which piece of hell would you rather have? Would you choose? Would you choose to be an enslaved person? Would you choose to be alive but have nothing? Would you choose that, or would you choose, having lived here for 15,000 years, white people come and say they're friendly, and over time the only thing left of what you were and what your culture was is pieces taken out of the ground because none of your tribe exists anymore? Which piece of hell would you choose? Where does the Center for Freedom start? Does it start 400 years ago? Is it the Center for Freedom of Blacks in America? Or is it the Center for Freedom of Peoples? Peoples who have been crushed in one way or another. And no piece of hell is better than the other one. So I think about Steve Adkins, chief of the Chickahominy. I don't know how many years Steve Adkins worked in the United States Congress to finally have the United States say that, what, 4 tribes actually exist and they're recognized by the United States of America. I also don't know which of those tribes, if any of them, were the tribes that the British had treaties with. Which, when we created the freedom of the United States of America, we did not treat with any of those tribes. We just let them go. And most people think they disappeared. They did here. They disappeared here. On the John Smith Trail, we came up with a concept called indigenous cultural landscapes. And the idea was to try to work with tribal members on particular landscapes where their tribes were, to identify what's important about that landscape in relationship to your culture and how would you define it. And we talked about having that kind of a study done here. And the reason that we never did a study here and never will do that study here is there's nobody left to talk to. You can't do it here. You can't do it here. So where does freedom lie? Where does freedom lie, and where does a National Center for Freedom start, or is it a National Center for Black Freedom in the United States? Thank you.
Well, thank you, John. Very good points. I actually wrote that bill to provide sovereignty for the Virginia Indian tribes, introduced it, sponsored it for almost the entire time I was in the Congress, only to be frustrated each year for one reason or another. People thought that it was going to bring in gambling. Others thought that it was unfair to 7-Elevens and so on because you would be taxed on Native American property. It was a terribly frustrating experience. Steve and others kept it going though, and finally persevered, which is really the story of securing freedom. You just have to keep persevering and keep your eyes on the prize. Tim Kaine was excellent in terms of carrying that. George Allen helped me in the Senate for a number of years, but it finally got done. It was more than 4 tribes. But unfortunately, none of those tribes, to the best of our knowledge, actually lived on this site. Those tribes were pretty well extinguished, it seems, at least in Virginia. But to acknowledge that history and to sort of resurrect it in the minds of Americans is important to do, and I appreciate the fact that you continue to bring that issue up because it's an important one to be included in the story of Monroe. So thank you, Jim. I think it's Dr. Ellis's time at this point, and then Superintendent Friend.
Robin, this is such a big, hairy, audacious idea until it's hard not to like it and support it. But everybody's mind went in 10 different directions when we heard the concept. I agree with Mary that planning has to take place before implementation can take place in terms of announcing an idea as big as this one. Oh, it's got wonderful legs as it relates to the variety of ways that you can have a variety of conversations about the ills that we all suffer. And when I talk about a center, I think about a center, I don't think about a center for African American history. I think about a center that includes all of our history. I think about a center that is not just national, but one that's global. So I think about the reach that a center like this could have, and that takes planning. When we started the museum, one of the things that we decided was that we wanted to send out a message that we existed before the building existed. That there were places we wanted to go to allow, we had like 5 cities, Los Angeles and New York and Philadelphia and Atlanta, and places that we wanted to make sure we sent programs and we sent communities and we sent ideas so that these large populations could then sort of realize that we existed and also connect and collaborate with us before the museum was even built. That helped with fundraising, that helped with ideas about exhibitions, that helped with ideas about collections. So it was a huge, huge thing. We did this almost 8 years before we began the museum itself, and never regretted doing it, because it was a thing that allowed us to establish our identity in a national way, in an international way, that has served us in good stead. But still, when we opened the museum, there were people, not just nationally, not just in the 5 cities that we selected, but folk from all over the world. We got invitations to go to Croatia. We got invitations to go to Dakar. Curators jumped on it. We got invitations to go in a global way all across the world, because it was the world that had seen and had been inspired by the museum. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to be inspired by this concept, and they're going to want the definition of this concept to fit their definition of such a concept. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to offer you money. They're going to offer you resources, and they're going to say, if you do this or if you do that, you can get our money. And poor people don't mind saying, yes, we will do this and we will do that. But in many ways, it negates the crux and the foundation of why we, as an institution, began this, what we think is success and what we think is valuable to teach from this particular point of view. We had FBI coming and saying, we'll give you money if you teach our FBI officers about African American history. The same thing with Metro Police, the same thing with state police. They began asking us things that we simply could not do. Who knew that we were going to get 5 million people in 3 years to come to the museum? Who knew that there were going to be more demands and more requests than we had the bandwidth to actually accommodate? And that's my fear with this idea. It is so big and so huge until I think it can run aground of resources and run aground of a plan that will allow you to have the infrastructure you will need in order to make it successful, which means don't do it. It just means do it in a phased approach. You decide what you want to do year 1. You decide what you want to do in year 2 and year 3 and so on. And that will give you also, I think, the leverage you need to determine how you want to respond to this story. As Ed was saying, it goes before freedom. Much of this history that we want to talk about is something that happened before the whole concept of freedom existed. And there are those historians and others who will tell you that freedom is still contested. So how do you do that in a way that allows the program to be successful and in a way that allows you to maintain control of the program? It's got to begin with a comprehensive plan that allows you to look at a variety of perspectives and then make a determination about where you want to start deliberately. Not because you promised somebody you're going to do something at a point when you weren't ready, but what is the deliberate plan of action that you want to implement that will allow this to be successful? Because the worst thing you can do is put a National Center for Freedom on your moniker, put it in all of your advanced materials, and then not be able to keep the promises that you make.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellis. Superintendent Brown?
Is there a timeline when we have to spend the money?
Yeah, 3 years.
Yes.
Well, it's a 3-year grant, but it's a 5-year planning period of time that you all have put together. And I think Mary's feeling a little more comfortable. The first couple of years, the money we've been given is really just to support currently what Park Service in Fort Monroe is already doing in their programming, but to spend the second and the third year looking at ways of going to fourth graders in the other municipalities. Another example would be the staff have always wanted to do a small lecture series, a Freedom Lecture Series. So for the first 3 to 4 years, they're trying to put together a series of just 3 lectures, very doable. The long-term view, though, would be that we would create a forum, a Freedom Forum, much like my Richmond friends here, much like the Richmond Forum that's 35 years old now. Also, watching every step of the way, the earned income. This is going to have a lot of earned income revenue sources to it as well. But I think we really need for the next 5 years to do things in small ways, test it, expand as we go along.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if I may respond to my former vice president just for a second. Rex, you're exactly right. And when
I apologize for getting so excited about that. But I'm smarting with the burns that took place when we were trying to open the museum, as well as what I see as an idea that has a great deal of promise. So that's what brought about my.
Sure, and I'm going to explain to you and to Ms. Bunning is that when the FMF approached me that we had an opportunity to apply for this grant, they will tell you that the first thing out of my mouth is, well, let's talk about bandwidth. Let's talk about what I can do and what I will be able to accomplish for you. And I think from that we were able to devise the programming that we presented to the Newport News shipyard that were very digestible chunks. That's as far as I can look forward to. The programs that we've identified, I think, are doable. I think we have the bandwidth to be able to do that. But I'm a firm believer that you don't put the cart before the horse. To become a real national center for freedom, there's going to take a lot more work, a lot more thought and planning to be put into that. But I think what we've put together for the next 3 years is it can be accomplished and can be accomplished successfully. And we've had those discussions with the National Park Service as well. Terry, you want to?
I just want to be real quick.
This is Superintendent.
Boy, I think when Moses was a baby, slavery had been around for thousands of years. And, it's so easy to identify freedom or the lack of with African Americans or Native Americans or American Indians. But I really feel strongly that there's not enough information on all of these topics for this space. So what I'm leaning towards is maybe there's some public scholarly work that could be done. Maybe we can look at some of the historically black colleges or some of these underserved communities and pull some of the brightest up to come to Fort Monroe and do some research for us. And do it on a large scale where it gets national attention that we're doing something like that. Just a thought, but we need some scholarly research on some of these subjects because there are a lot of different opinions about what happened in this space, and we need some fresh thinking around that. Just a thought.
Further comment? And I think, Robin, do you want any further summary remarks?
No, the only thing I'll add is all these things that have been said today by the members of the board are exactly on target. I think the concept that we have, and one reason I brought up headlines in the presentation is that every day we can grab a story off the press and make it a issue to discuss. To get to Terry's point, the image that keeps occurring in my mind over and over again is the Catholic school student body confronting an American native in the center of the capital of the nation. That's a story. That's where we need people to be brought into public discussion, whether we actually bring the actual participants in or not, and I think we can do that. But as any good interpreter will tell you, and Terry and I come from that school, is homework, homework, homework. And unless we have the research to back these things up, unless we have the scholars to say, Here's are the things you really ought to prime the pump with for the discussion, and we will get lost at sea. So I agree with all that. That is the concept. And we want to be the magnet to bring these folks here together to have these discussions. So that's my summary.
Very good. Well, thank you, Robin. I think at this point,